We are excited to have you join us for the Skandalaris Center's startup webinar around crafting a pitch and spotting bias in entrepreneurial presentations. My name is Jessica Weldon. I'm the Assistant Director of Programs here at the Skandalaris Center, and I am joined today by two-time WashU alumni, Elise Hoffman. So we're excited to have Elise joining us, and Elise is going to cover the crafting a pitch portion, and I'm going to cover the unconscious bias portion. So I'm going to turn it over to Elise now and let Elise share her screen and cover her PowerPoint, and we'll get this party started.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to see all of your faces here on Zoom today. Hope you're all enjoying a wonderful STL Startup Week. As Jessica mentioned, this event is sponsored by the Skandalaris Center, but we know that there are many folks here who may be, across the St. Louis startup community. So really just wanted to welcome you all into the space today. To kick us off, wanted to take a quick poll to know who is in the room with us. Are you a WashU student, staff, perhaps an entrepreneur? So Jessica is going to start a poll. And please just tell us, who you are. We'd love to hear from you. So as you guys are filling out this poll, wanted to go over just a few of our goals for today. There will be three portions of the event. First, I'll talk through some of the basics of a pitch. So both, thinking about a very short elevator pitch that might be as long as, only 2 minutes when you just have a moment to share your idea, as well as a more structured VC pitch, which can be anywhere from, 30 minutes to an hour typically, and kind of talk through some of those components. From there, taking into account some of the cultural dynamics that may be at play when pitching a venture capital firm, Jessica will dive into some of the unconscious bias and how to really reframe questions if you receive what you may perceive to be a biased question. And then finally, we are here for you. If you have specific questions as you're thinking through your own pitch, really want to dive into those as well. So it looks like from the poll, we have quite a great mix here, some alumni from the university, entrepreneurs, a few faculty and staff. So really welcome to all of you. We're happy to have you here. So next up, just wanted to share who I am. Like Jessica mentioned, my name is Elise. I am a Texan born and bred, so I bring that with me no matter where I am, but I have lived in St. Louis now for the last 13 years. Originally came to the city to attend Washington University, where I had a great undergraduate experience. I was a Spanish literature major, Latin American studies minor, spent 6 months of that time studying abroad in Santiago, Chile, which you can see a picture down here in the southern cone of South America. From there, went to work at the university for 3 years in the Office of Undergraduate Admissions. And right now I work as a VC, so I hear a lot of startup pitches, but in this role, I was the one giving the pitches. So going across the country and, sharing, as we called it, the word of woo, everything about WashU, everything about St. Louis, and really trying to convince people why this was the place to be. Decided to kind of continue on in a more of a business-focused career. And so pursued an MBA again at Washington University. And that's where I discovered, everything going on here in St. Louis. Ultimately, after graduation, started with Cultivation Capital. So this is where I am today. I work as a general partner on our healthcare practice. Cultivation Capital is an early stage venture capital firm that invests in, very young startup companies that have a little bit of revenue, but are really looking to get off the ground. So we make investments in software IT, in agriculture tech, and agri-food investments through an entity called the Yield Lab. And then, as I mentioned, I work on more of the healthcare side, so investing in biotech companies, digital health companies as well. So that's a bit about me. Just to get a sense of who all's here, I'd love if you're open to it to introduce yourself in the chat. Just tell us your name, if you have a company you work with, what company that is, and anything you're hoping to learn today or what brought you to the event today. And as you guys are introducing yourselves, Jessica has a second poll that she'll also pull up here for us. And this is, again, trying to think about what are you really trying to get out of the event today, so we can try to tailor it as much as possible to your needs. So just to share, all of you, I believe, are local, so you probably know all the wonderful things about St. Louis. But when I was really debating, what kind of business career I wanted to have, what drew me to St. Louis was really the startup scene. It was right around the time we were starting to get a lot of headlines, fastest growing startup city in America, #1 place to start a business. And I have just found it to be such a welcoming, community with so much to offer. One of the great things is that your money goes a long way here. It's much more capital efficient to run a business here, which means, you can hire more people, and ultimately, the cost of your failure is lower. A lot of entrepreneurs, the first idea may not be the, company that they stick with for the rest of their career. But you can, try out ideas, fail fast, try again when you're in that capital efficient environment. The other thing I will say is there are so many different entrepreneur support organizations, investor groups, startup accelerator programs, as well as all the programs WashU offers to really help you accelerate your business and then also promote you as well. So because we are in a smaller market, you can be a little bit of a big fish in a small pond here and work with all the great organizations here. The thing I will say, one of our deficiencies as a region is that we just don't have as much capital as exists, as many of you know, on the coast. So the Bay Area, New York, Boston is really where, most of the VC capital is concentrated, which means that if you're in the Midwest, there are firms here, there are opportunities, but there's a scarcity of capital, which just leads to more competition. And it just means you have to find ways, to differentiate yourself. So just taking a look at what some of you shared on the poll, looks like looking for some practical tips today, a little bit of pitch practice, and also understanding the bias. So let's go ahead and just jump right into the components of a pitch. So first of all, if you've ever heard the phrase kind of ABC, always be closing, you should always think about yourself as pitching. Whether it's a 1 minute, conversation or a formal pitch, every conversation that you have is an opportunity to share with someone your message, share with them, what you're trying to accomplish, and ultimately learn, is there a way that that individual could help you and your business? So to dive in a little bit more about an elevator pitch, just wanted to show you a short little video here. So I'll pull this up for you. And this is someone who's going to share a bit more about what an elevator pitch is and why it matters.
The elevator pitch is your first step towards becoming a networking god. Hey, Mr. CEO, good to see you, buddy. Good to see you.
Ruben, right?
Yes.
Oh, I've heard a lot of good things about it.
Nice.
So,
nice.
What is it that you do then exactly?
Well, I like merge all my talents together and just give it out to the world, like all my stuff inside me. It's like a mixture of stuff. Like, I'm a creative guy, people's person, obviously. I write a bit of comedy, I present, I get up stage, talk to people, and I just know together all my creative ideas and my whole team. That's not an elevator pitch. That's the ramblings of an unprepared bitch. An elevator pitch is a sentence that sums up what you do so concisely that you can tell it in a space of the average elevator ride. If you were to write it down, it'd be about 140 characters, which is about a tweet. So let's try that again, shall we? Hey, Mr. CEO, good to see you, sir. Good to see you.
Hi, Ruben, right?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, I've heard a lot of good things about you.
Okay, nice.
So, what is it you do then, actually?
I'm a presenter and a comic. I host live events and I make online comedy videos. And I'm also co-founder of individualism.co.uk, which is the UK's leading men's style blog.
Excellent. I've got a few events coming up and we could do with your services. Have you got a card?
I do. Yes, I do. There you go.
I'll be in touch.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a nice day, mate. See, preparation, it got me some potential work with the CEO of this whole company.
Did you think a men's style employee?
Remember, guys, your elevator pitch should be short and to the point. Even if you do, there's an idea flaw. You need to know exactly what you do, as you do not want to give people the wrong idea.
All right, so hopefully that gives you just a bit of a sense of what an elevator pitch is. The idea is if you're in an elevator and you have that chance to pitch someone, how do you do it? And Inc. magazine has actually dissected, what are the key components to a short pitch like that? So give me just a second here.
Let me just start with.
Okay, taking that off. And just confirming that you can see my screen, opening up the PowerPoint here. We good to go? Okay. So Inc. magazine talks about the three kind of key components to one of these more informal pitches is really the benefit. So what is it that your product or your offering or your service provides? Why would the person want to buy it? Or why would they want to support you? What's the differentiator? So when you think about yourself relative to the competitors in your field, how are you different and why are you better? And then ultimately, you always want an ask. And an ask may not be for money. An ask may be for mentorship. It may be for a connection. But really, even in every informal conversation, think about what is that ask? What is the way that you can continue your relationship with someone by engaging them in your business? People want to help, people want to get involved, so don't be afraid to make that ask. That's one of the most important things to ensure that every networking meeting you have, turns into another meeting and turns into a follow-up. So from there, and I have a little text-heavy slide here, but wanted to go through all the components of a more formal VC pitch. So if you get to the point where you are deciding to go out there, you're seeking investment from perhaps an angel investor, which is just a high net worth individual. Perhaps it's, an accelerator program or, some other kind of program or a VC fund. These are kind of the components that you want to have in your pitch. Just a couple of kind of points of order. One of the common things that you'll do is send kind of a send ahead document. So a lot of times this is a one pager, or it is a brief slide deck, so absolutely not more than 10 slides to talk about your business so that somebody can have a chance to just breeze through. They're probably not going to read it in detail, but just get a sense before the meeting of what you do, what you're all about. So that's a really, kind of powerful document to utilize. The next piece is when you think about preparing for a meeting. And if you have a first meeting, it may only be 30 minutes of time. A lot of them are 60 minutes, but I would not count on that. Is that general kind of rule is if you have 30 minutes with an investor, prepare an 8-minute pitch. You do not want to be over time going through your presentation and not giving them a chance to ask questions. It's really, again, this is about relationship building. So you want to have that time for genuine human interaction. And if you spend the whole time talking at them, kind of like I'm doing right now, you can't learn from them, you can't listen to their questions, and you really want them to guide the conversation as much as possible. With that said, part of them guiding the conversation might be interrupting you. So if you get interrupted in the middle of your presentation, take it in stride, take a moment, answer their questions. Even if you're going to get to the point that they're asking about, in 3 slides, go ahead and jump ahead, talk about it now, because that's what they really care about. So be prepared for that interruption, be prepared for feedback, both positive and negative. And again, take that feedback as a gift, take it in. Their feedback and their questions will help you understand what they care about as an investor. And then ultimately, even in the 60-minute situation, I would never have a presentation more than 20 slides. The closer you can get to 10 slides, the better. So when you think about what would be in those, 10 to 15 slides of a deck, this is kind of a typical order here. You can mix and match it a little bit, but there is a bit of a formula. So first you want to talk about a problem. So again, what is the pain point that you are solving for? Just bringing a product to market is not enough. You want to really speak to who is your customer and what is the reason that they are going to switch products or adopt your product in the first place. What's the difficulty that they're facing? Next, you want to talk about your solution. So how does your product, service, offering, address that existing problem? From there, you want to get into your target market. So this is really estimating your market size. And what I recommend for this is to do 2 different analyses. So 1, a top-down analysis, and 2, a bottom-up analysis. And then to also talk about growth rates in the market. So for a top-down analysis, this is where you're thinking about kind of the overall size of the opportunity. So if you had an alcoholic beverage company, you'd want to be talking about the US market or the global market for, beverages in general, and then maybe narrow it down to alcoholic beverages. And this is also where you would tie in a growth rate, right? So is there going to be, increased alcohol consumption over the coming years for whatever reason? Maybe the population's growing, or maybe there's a new trend. Just getting the high level picture. That's what the top-down analysis is for. And basically you want to say we are part of a large and growing market. The second piece is a bottom-up analysis, and this is a little more tailored to your target market. So this is thinking about, okay, if I have, a very specific demographic that I'm going for, say it is, women ages 18 to 24, how many of these women exist, for example, in the US market? And if they bought your product, how many products would they buy in a year? What would be their annual spending? And then you can get to that annual, kind of market size number. But I personally think it's helpful to have both kind of the big picture top down, and then also the bottom up. And the bottom up can also help you think through, your go-to-market strategy and talk about how you plan to reach these customers as well. Next piece is your competitive advantage. So both when thinking about legacy competitors, so who are those, perhaps big corporations that are already out on the market, as well as new and emerging, technologies that may be coming out or maybe in the process of being developed. How do you stack up, and why is your product better? Next, there's a phrase, kind of jargon in the industry called traction. And this is just, what has your company achieved to date? Something that investors are always trying to think about is how to de-risk their ideas. So, no matter where a company is in its stage of development, as an investor, I'm thinking, what are the risks and how can I mitigate those risks? So as an entrepreneur, you want to think about, okay, how can I prove that, I'm the right person to do this, and how much our company has already achieved? So you can then, get that investor thinking, oh, they've already de-risked it because they have these customers, or they have some investment, or they've, expanded to a certain geography. That's really the goal here. From there, you want to talk about growth. So as an investor, we're working backwards. We make money when you exit the company. So a lot of times for VC investment, we're thinking about exits in terms of M&A. So does your company actually get acquired by a larger company and get a payout at that time? Or perhaps are you planning to go public, and could we make money at that point? And then we try to estimate, okay, what's the amount that this company is going to sell for? And we work backwards to figure out what our ROI is going to be. So the growth section is really about, how are you going to scale this company over time to work towards that exit? And some of the things that you want to include in a section like this, it's very common to have a 5-year income statement on there. This is a summary. You probably just want, a couple streams of revenue at the top, some of your key expense categories below that, just to kind of walk through, what does that look like? And the most important number they're probably going to be looking at is, where can this company get in terms of revenue? Because again, that's the biggest growth driver in 5 years. And when you're thinking about how to model out this, I would think about the first 2 years as being very realistic. You want to be mindful about your budget, about how much money you're going to have, and be very thoughtful about all of the assumptions that you put in, and try to make that as close to the real numbers as possible. As you get into years 3, 4, 5 of the financial projections, it's more about what is possible. If you scaled this company to the best of your ability, as big as it can be, you raised all the money you needed, you were successful in reaching all your markets, what kind of revenue could you get to? And it's okay if, year 5 revenue, is higher than you actually get to. That's really more about telling, again, that growth story and showing that you're ready to scale this company and make it as large as it can be. The next piece here is not something you'll necessarily see in, a typical kind of, slide deck, but it's something that I really like. And I'm just kind of obsessed with this concept of a milestone slide. And basically what this does is it allows you to talk about both your past and your future company milestones. So when you think about the drivers that are important for your business, using the alcoholic beverage example, how many customers do you have? How much revenue do you have? How many units have you sold? What kind of distributor partnerships do you have? Those are the kinds of things that are driving growth for the business. So you can kind of talk about what you've accomplished, and then in the next, call it 3 years, what you plan to do, and what kind of funding you're going to need to get you there. Another kind of key milestone, I've talked about some of those drivers, but ultimately revenue is the most important milestone. So also just kind of showing us, okay, where are we trying to get in terms of revenue? What are the business milestones to help us get there? And what kind of funding are we going to need to get there as well? So I'm a big fan of this, just as a clear timeline, so I can think as an investor, what have they done? Where are they going? When could they exit? Next up is just your team slide. So what are the unique skills, experiences, network does your team have that make you, the absolute best team to run this company? So that's where you really want to brag on yourselves, talk about your experiences, talk about your year's experience, talk about how well you work as a team. It's a, simple slide, but it's really an important piece of your pitch, because ultimately, if you're an early stage company, you may not have a lot of revenue. I'm taking a bet on, do I think you will be successful? And the company idea might change, it might pivot, but the founders and who is leading the company is really important. So that leadership piece is, a small slide, but a really big piece. And then the final piece is the ask. In an informal setting, you might be asking for an introduction or for mentorship. With this is really more of a financial ask. So you want to put on here at a minimum, how much money is your company raising? And then if you have any terms associated with the raise, so it could be the instrument you're using. Maybe you're using a safe or a convertible note, or maybe you're doing an equity round. That's the kind of thing you would want to indicate. And if you already have any terms set, you want to include that as well. So this is the overall kind of structure for a pitch. We will have some time later on for Q&A, so feel free to start shooting any questions into the chat as they come up. I'm happy to dive into any of these areas in more detail, but this is really kind of the structure that you'll use. We are all in the world of Zoom right now, so just be thoughtful. If you're going to be on video, especially if you're recording, for a pitch competition, something like that, clean your lens off. So, do a little bit of this, make sure the camera is focused on you, set the phone or the video camera in a stable position. When I see people holding the camera, it's very distracting. You want them focused on you. Neutral backgrounds are helpful. I'm a fan of the jewel tones. So if you can find that either to wear or to have behind you, that is helpful. You want good lighting, not too bright. You don't need to see every, wrinkle on your face kind of thing, but, definitely don't want it to be dark. They want to be able to illuminate your face. Make sure that you're clear. Background noise is a real thing. It's annoying. I have a little puppy, so I don't mind it when I hear background noise, but you don't want to distract from your message. So try to find a quiet spot. And then finally, think about your framing. So this is less important for a Zoom call, but if you are recording a video, a lot of times you don't want to be right in the center of the screen. You actually want to be kind of off. So if I was doing the rule of thirds, I'd probably be right around here. And this is just really about where the eye goes when you're looking, at a video. And this is just a more compelling format. So something to think about. When you're thinking about kind of equity and inclusion, a few other things you might want to think about is, right here I have a very light font color on a light color. For someone who is visually impaired, this could actually be something hard to read. Whereas, when you see the darker font on the screen, that's a little bit better. So obvious, but, can actually be important for those who are visually impaired. Another thing that can be helpful, particularly when you are recording videos, is to include the closed captioning at the bottom. And when Jessica comes on a little bit later, she will actually have captioning underneath, so you can see what that looks like, even for a Zoom meeting, which is a possibility. So final thing I'll kind of say here is you are presenting yourself. Yes, all of the components are important, but you want to be confident, you want to be passionate, you want them to remember you. So really think about this as you're telling a story and you want to bring them into your story. You want to take them along the journey with you. So showing that passion, pulling them in and getting them to kind of, love the idea and want to help you is really important. And for those of you who may feel a little bit of imposter syndrome, maybe you don't even identify as an entrepreneur, but you are a small business owner, you are pitching for funding, fake it till you make it. That confidence is so important. It can be a little bit of a, kind of an ego kind of culture sometimes. So it's important to really show that confidence because chances are, if you've done your research, you have your business off the ground, you should be confident. So just bring that with you. Into the presentation. A few other quick tips here. You want to speak to the lowest common denominator. This is something I see a lot with life sciences entrepreneurs or very technical businesses. You may have a very complex concept, but you need to boil it down to someone who's a layman, someone who doesn't know anything about your industry. Assume they know nothing. You don't want to, insult them, of course, but really dumb it down so that anybody could understand. I try to say, if a fifth grader came in and watched your presentation, would they be able to tell someone else about your business? They can ask more technical questions. They can dig in if they know more. So start there and build from there. Keep it short, which I'm failing to do right now, but I'm going to finish up soon. And then the final thing is just that first impression, super important. A lot of times people make an impression within the first 5 to 10 seconds. So start strong and then, really end strong as well. And that's with the ask, the financial ask. And don't be afraid. That's why you're there. You're there to ask for money. They're there to potentially consider giving you money. So end strong with the ask there. So now I'm going to pass it over to Jessica. We've talked about some of the nuts and bolts of a presentation, but one of the things that we have to consider is a little bit of cultural context here. In terms of VCs, it is a very white male dominated industry. And still today, while there are an increasing number of women founders and BIPOC founders, venture capital firms haven't quite caught up. They are still investing mostly in all white male teams. And you actually see this based on kind of who's sitting around the investment table mirrors who receives VC funding. So only about 12% of VC partners at firms that have over 25 million in assets under management are women. So vast majority are men. And then when you look at, for example, Black investors in those senior positions, it's only about 2%. And this is mirrored, in who receives funding, actually down to some of the percentages. So teams with a female founder receive 12% of VC funding. Teams with a Latinx founder receive, it's under 2% of all funding, and teams with a Black founder receive under 1%, or right around 1%. So mostly just wanted to kind of bring attention to this. This is an important thing to note. There are a lot of reasons for this. Part of it has to do with the networks of the existing VCs. A lot of times people's networks tend to look like themselves. But there also can be bias in the process. So I will pass it over to Jessica to talk about how can you recognize bias and, if you see it, if you experience it, what do you do from there? So thanks so much, Jessica, take it away.
Thank you, Elise. That was fantastic. So many great pointers for how to structure a successful pitch. And as Elise shared, there are definitely some cultural realities that we are working with. And research in a variety of fields has shown that there is unconscious bias. And most of the time it's unconscious. We aren't aware of it. So one of the things that Elise and I are committed to individually, and that the Skandalaris Center is committed to as a whole, is uncovering that bias, bringing awareness to those biases, and really trying to level the playing field for everyone who is passionate about entrepreneurship and really looking to move their venture concepts forward. So I'm going to cover some of the ways that we can identify our unconscious bias, what the impacts of that unconscious bias is, especially when it comes to funding decisions. But for anybody who is in the position of pitching to entrepreneurial judges or investors, how you can combat that and how you can actually make a change to have a more positive influence on funding decisions. So we're not powerless in this situation, which is really important to know. So I'm excited to share with you a little bit about how we identify our biases and how to work against that. So first of all, research has shown that questions presented to people during an entrepreneurial pitch tend to be framed in two different ways. One is in a positive way, what a researcher has termed as promotion-based questions, which focuses on the positives. You know, how are you going to acquire customers? How are you going to grow your market share? What are your major milestones? Things like that. Whereas there are other questions that are framed in a prevention-based manner, which tend to be very negative. So the slide that I have up here, you can kind of see the difference in how those questions are framed. Prevention tends to focus on how do you retain customers? Is your business plan defensible? Will you break even, rather than focusing on the positive aspects of one's business? Now, Elise will certainly tell you that as an investor, people need to ask questions about risks and liabilities. That's incredibly important as investors consider whether or not what they're putting their money into is a sound investment. But what research has shown is that questions framed in a promotion-based way tend to receive promotion-based answers. So those answers that are coming back are very positive, whereas questions framed in the prevention manner receive prevention-based answers. So the answers tend to be more negative. And those outcomes are affected then because obviously as an investor or a judge, if you're getting negative, answers to the questions you're asking, you're going to be less inclined to fund something. So entrepreneurs tend to raise 3.8 million less for each prevention-based question. So the more negative questions that a presenter receives, the sharper the decline in the funding decision. Whereas pitches that are focused on promotion can receive up to 7 times more funding. So that's a very stark difference in terms of whether you're answering questions positively or negatively. And research by Dr. Donna Cairns, a PhD from Oxford, has found that there's actually significant bias at work during venture pitches in that men are more likely to be asked questions framed around potential successes or those promotion-based questions, whereas women are more likely to be asked about potential risks. And again, like I said, you're always going to want to hear about risks, but what Dr. Cairns' research has shown is that on the whole, men are more likely to receive more positive questions than women, whereas women are receiving primarily negative questions. So of course they're responding negatively, and that's negatively impacting their funding decisions. Which is unfortunate because 40% of all US companies are female run. Elise had some of those statistics up earlier, and they receive only 2% of the venture funding. In entrepreneurial pitch situations, on the average, women are receiving about 2 million in funding, whereas men are receiving about 16 million in funding. So again, that's a deep disparity when almost half of all US-based companies are female run. However, like I said, there is a lot that we can do to combat bias in these situations. So one of the things that the Skandalaris Center has been doing is working with our judges and our investors to help them recognize the difference in the types of questions that are being asked and being able to recognize when things are being asked positively versus negatively, and working to ensure that all questions asked of presenters are the same, regardless of whether they're men or women. and making a conscious effort to frame all questions the same every time. So that's the tricky thing about bias. Again, we don't necessarily know that we're doing it, but if we take the time to stop and think and bring some consciousness to how we're framing questions, it can be really helpful in changing the outcomes so that we start seeing more women get funding, which is just so very important. And for people who are in a situation where you're pitching, so as Elise was talking about crafting your pitch, the importance of that back and forth conversation and leaving time for questions and answers is to be able to recognize when questions being asked of you are promotion versus prevention. And if you can identify what questions are being asked positively or negatively, you can actually stop, think, reframe your answers, and have a better outcome in the funding decisions. The research by Dr. Cans has shown that reframing answers can lead to a 14 times increase in funding, which is so very important. So now we're going to do a couple of rounds of, or no, wait, first, quick reminder, these are ways to spot words that can give you the keys to whether things are framed positively or negatively. So just some examples of words to look out for. So on the positive side, accomplish, achieve, desire, earn, momentum, progress, speed, prevention, obviously, accuracy, careful, conservative, evade, responsible, threat, vigilance, things like that. So it's not, you're not going to see all of these words every single time, but it can really help you think through the questions that you're getting so that you can reframe answers as needed. All right, so back to being a little more interactive since Elise and I have talked at you for a little bit. So I want to give everybody a chance to weigh in here, and Elise is going to launch a poll. But the question that's up now, if everybody will respond to the poll, is this question framed as promotion or prevention? Can you talk about, or can you talk to how big this market could potentially be with a larger set of customers? Promotion or prevention? There we go. Right. The last question was framed in a promotion or positive manner, emphasizing the large size of the overall market and opportunity to gain even more customers. All right, Elise, if you'll relaunch the poll, I'll do the next one. Oh, shoot. Sorry. Ignore this slide. I can't have polls up and, all right. Is the following question framed in promotion or prevention? How do you plan to defend your startup's market share given how competitive the landscape is? Great, that's correct. The last question was framed in prevention, emphasizing how to protect or not lose your portion of the market. Now, is there anybody willing to give us a shot at how you might reframe an answer to that kind of question in a more positive manner? You can either throw it in the chat or hop off mute.
Well, I think that the picture could emphasize that if there's a lot of competition, it's because we're getting into a really good market.
That's awesome. Thank you, Valentina. Yes, you could reframe that as we're playing in such a large market and fast growing market, it's bound to attract new entrants. We hope to gain increasing share in this attractive market by leveraging our startup's unique assets. Next one. Is the following question framed in promotion or prevention? How long will it take you to break even? Right. That last question was framed in prevention, emphasizing how to go from a negative to 0 rather than a positive position. Anybody want to take a shot at reframing that in a positive way? Again, you can put it in the chat or just hop off mute.
I'm happy to jump in
I
here. Oh, go ahead, go ahead.
okay. I also answer prevention, but not as the answer like shown in the screen. I think about like the startup market. When you're funding a startup, like your goal is to grow, not to earn money. So if an investor asks you like, when are you getting into the breaking point, is because he doesn't realize how growth you can get like until you get for the breaking point as Facebook, you know, like they invest a lot of money until they start doing that.
Excellent, thank you.
Can you also take it like when you answer, rather than stopping at the 0, just expand beyond that into like going into the positive part, or that's...
Definitely. Thank you for both of those inputs. Yeah, we can reframe that as you're managing the business for top line growth with good deal of momentum, and then going into your sales forecast. So one thing to note about some of these reframing, they're very heavy on the jargon and entrepreneurial speak, but to some of Elise's points, you also have to know the audience that you're pitching to. So there are times when you absolutely have to bring it down to the 5th grade level, but sometimes you also have to be able to speak the business speak of the investors that you're talking with. All right, one more. Is the following question framed in promotion or prevention? How do you plan to monetize your users? All right, that one is actually promotion. That one was tricky, but they focus on the monetization, which is the opportunity for sales growth and earning revenue. So that one was definitely tricky. All right, that's the end of the practice. So for more information about this unconscious bias, you can check out Dr. Kans's work. She has a fantastic TED Talk, and her Harvard Review article is fantastic. I'm gonna just put up a couple of upcoming events, and then I'm going to turn off my screen share, and Elise and I are welcome to take questions. So 2 upcoming events. I know there's a ton of stuff going on this week for St. Louis Startup Week, but next week we are doing our Helping Entrepreneurs Rise panel on Wednesday, November 18th at 3 p.m. Central. Join us to talk with a diverse group of entrepreneurs to talk about funding and mentorship and resilience in this very interesting and unique time. And then for the Skandalaris Center, our fellowship demo day is going to be Tuesday, December 15th at 3 p.m. Central. And we invite people to come celebrate with our first cohort of fellows who have been with us for the past year and who are developing their own new venture concepts and are excited to debut them. So I'm going to go ahead and stop screen sharing here, opening it up to questions. Sydney, I know you've been monitoring the chat, so if we've got questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. Sydney, if you want to read those questions out to us, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, so we don't have any right now, so let's get them.
All right.
in.
I do see one. Steve asked how I was doing the fancy closed captioning thing.
Oh yeah, I told Steve to email me. I told him we could email him that later.
Oh, fantastic, thank you. I'm gonna give everybody a hint now. If you happen to utilize Office 365, like online, the online web app for Office 365, and you go into the PowerPoint function in the Office web app, there is the option to turn on always use closed captioning. It's a brand new thing that I learned about. For some reason, it's not available like in the desktop version of PowerPoint. Don't ask me why. But if you use the online web app, it helps a lot. And actually, the one thing I learned is that it sounds like Elise, maybe we should have run your PowerPoint through mine, because when Valentina and Yasir were talking, it was picking up their closed captioning too. So lessons learned, y'all.
Sorry, mute it. We got a question here from Richard. Can you walk through the typical VC pitch process from initial outreach to term sheet? For instance, is there a pre-screen call before meeting with a partner, etc.?
That is all Elise.
Yeah, so Richard, thanks for the question. So every firm is going to have their own slightly different process, but just to share, a little bit about how we do it. Typically, we would have some kind of introduction. So the company might have reached out on our website. I will say, if you are trying to get in front of a VC, the best way to do it is to have a warm introduction. So if you can find someone who knows that person who can introduce you, that's going to go a lot further than just kind of a cold reach out, because sometimes I try to answer all of those, but some people just won't respond if you do a cold reach out on LinkedIn or something like that. So speaking of LinkedIn, actually, that can be a nice way to figure out who in my network do I know that might know this person. If you're trying to get introduced to someone, that's, I think, one of the most kind of underutilized aspects of LinkedIn that can be a helpful way to get an intro. But in terms of the process, a lot of times there's a first call. That may be short. It may be 20 or 30 minutes. Really the VC is trying to get a sense for, are you in the ballpark or not? And a lot of times before this call, you would send ahead, your one pager or your short deck. And that's a chance for the person, the VC, to read through, get a sense for your company. They may also ask you for some information. So we send out a link that has a little survey, and it will actually ask questions like, how many customers do you have? What is your revenue? How much money are you raising? Who are your investors to date? So that we can kind of get a sense for the company before we even have the first call. So then you have the first call. That's really a first impression. Are you even remotely in the scope of the fund kind of thing? Then if you are, you go into kind of the next step, which for us is putting together a little due diligence, it's called. So this is just research on your company. And we're going to be digging in, doing in our own independent research to understand, what do we think the market size is, competitive landscape. Do we have, do we see exit opportunities for this company so that we could generate an ROI? Again, just kind of understanding, are we interested in the space? Is the market big enough? Could we make a return? So from there, if we're still interested, we like the team, there could be a number of follow-up calls, or it could just go straight to a call with the partners. So one thing you do want to be mindful about is certain people can write checks in a VC firm and certain people can't. And it can be very difficult to figure out who has that decision-making authority and who doesn't. Be nice to everyone. Everyone will have an influence on the decision. But ultimately, you're trying to get to those decision makers. So an important step in the process would be a pitch to the partner team. And it may be one partner who has expertise in your area. It may be a pitch to the entire team. It could even be a pitch to a larger investment committee. So a lot of funds will have an investment committee that kind of weigh in on the decisions. The general partners ultimately have the final decision, but they're sort of seeking advice from a group of advisors. So you might have to pitch to them. So for us, again, the process is 30-minute pitch. We do some due diligence, pitch to the partners. Then we would do a really in-depth, like 30-page report on the company, ask you a bunch of questions, talk to your customers, dig in to understand your financial model. And the final step for us would be, you pitch in a formal, in-person, typically not in COVID format, to our investment committee. And then we would decide, okay, are we ready to move forward with a term sheet, or we're ready to jump onto the term sheet that maybe you got from another investor? So all in all, I would say the quickest you're looking at is, 2 to 3 months. A lot of times these relationships take more time. Don't take no as a final answer. keep in touch with VCs. There are a lot of reasons they might say no. It may have nothing to do with you. It may be that your company is too early stage. It may be just how their capital is allocated at that time. So if you get a no, first of all, don't be rude. Don't say like, you missed out on the biggest thing ever. Just, take it in stride and think about it. Okay, I'd love to update you in 3 to 6 months and tell you about my progress, kind of thing. So I'll pause there, but that's kind of the typical process.
Great. We have 2 more questions that have come in. The first one from Steve, actually quite a few more questions now. The first question from Steve asked, understanding the power of an elevator pitch when you're in front of investors, is it ever advisable to enter into an elevator conversation for casual encounters, i.e. you still deliver all the great things that you mentioned, Elise, but you do it via back and forth conversation versus a 2-minute pitch?
Yeah, so especially in the informal settings, I would avoid the pitch kind of formality as much as possible. It's a conversation. You can mention all the great things you're doing, but you want it to be more back and forth. Even with the pitch itself, a lot of times with the VCs, you may have that time, like I kind of talked about, 30-minute meeting, you give an 8-minute presentation. It's common to have a presentation, but ultimately things are typically going better if it's more conversational, if you allow time for questions, if you pause so that people can jump in and respond to what you're saying. So pitch your company all the time. Every conversation you have, bring up that company, talk about what you're doing, but pull in the person. That's how you engage them in what you're doing.
Great. And now Ed's question is, they work with a lot of tech startups that are too soon to seek funding because they don't have their own business model nailed down just yet, and may not have their product prototype developed. So what are the key things they should have completed before going to angels or early stage investors?
Yeah, so one of the first things I would say is find out from the prospective investors you're talking about what kind of stage they want. Different angel investors are going to have different levels of risk. So angel investors are probably one of the first places you can go, as well as very pre-seed, early stage startup accelerators. And these are the kind of folks that you could pitch before you have revenue. At the earliest stage, even with an angel or with a startup accelerator, you need to have a solid concept. And typically you want to have some kind of customer discovery work. So that just means validating that your customer has a pain point and wants your product to solve that pain point. One of the programs that exists out there is called the iCore program. And one of the things I love about this program is they make you go out and talk to 100 customers. So no matter what it is you're selling, go out there, put your boots on the ground and find 100 potential customers to interview about your product. That's the kind of work I would say before you talk to anyone, you need to have so that your business model, your strategy is informed by, what your customer actually wants. Every angel is going to be a little bit different. There is the St. Louis Archangels based here in St. Louis, which is a group of angel investors that will watch pitches together. I know they will look at pre-seed companies, but they probably would prefer a little bit of revenue or some pilots, just some kind of traction to show that your company's off to the races. Before you talk to VCs, probably looking to have some customers, have some revenue. For that Series A stage, which is kind of where we play, we usually like to see between 500,000 to $1 million in your annual run rate, which is basically just take your revenue from last month, and specifically if you're a software as a service company, take your subscription revenue, the recurring revenue, and multiply that by 12. And if that number is between 500,000 and $1 million, you're around the right stage. It takes a long time, obviously, to build up a company to get to that point. And so, that's around where I'd say, as you start to pitch VCs, where you want to be.
And Elise, you beat me to the punch on the product market fit piece. I was definitely going to jump in and to say iCore, anybody that's in the St. Louis area, affiliated with WashU, what have you. The Skandalaris Center offers a number of programs and resources around those things. So we do have an iCore cohort. For students and young alum, we have the Skandalaris Center Venture Competition, which is for early stage Sydney already put in the chat as well our link to the Global Impact Awards, which is for our students, faculty, staff, and alumni up to 10 years. And all of these competitions and all of these programs come with tons of mentorship and advising and guidance around product market fit and customer discovery. So always lots of options in terms of getting some of that work done and having some support as you go through that process.
So do we want to take, so Valentina and Andrew both just added questions. So I guess we can go through those real quick. And is that okay, Jessica?
Yeah, Elise will probably answer the first one.
That's what I figured.
And I can
Elise,
answer the final three.
okay, so the first one, Elise, is the one, should the one pager have the same information shown in the pitch slides?
Yes, so the one thing I would say is one pager means one page, not more than that. And you want to really break out what are the key things that you want the person to take away. And remember that they may not even actually read the entire one pager. People have very short attention spans. So with presentations or even with visual, like keep it simple, keep it obvious. One way to do this is to create almost like a little bar on the left-hand or the right-hand side of the paper that talks through the key points that you want them to know about your business. So what's the company name? When was it founded? How many customers do you have? What revenue do you have? Who are the key members of your team? Just anything that's super important that you want to make sure they absolutely see. You can kind of put in a little special section that maybe has a different color or something to make it stand out. And then in the middle section, yes, you are hitting those same kind of things. Technology, IP if you have it, market size, competitive differentiation. You probably don't want to get too much into the competitors, but again, what's the differentiator of your product? If you have exit strategy, so like what kinds of companies might you sell to, or if there are exit transaction comparables, which are just other companies that are like yours that have sold to companies, you could say, hey, this other company that's in my space sold to X large corporation for 100 million. And I think I could too. You could put something like that in there too. So same general concept, but like keep it brief, cut words because short attention spans.
And then Jessica, if you want to take the last three, is WashU doing something to change VC, raising percentage for minorities? Is the St. Louis Startup Weekend open for everyone? And is there a website or a list where people can find, prepare, or like find or prepare prevention or promotion questions?
Yes, yes, and yes is the short answer. For what is WashU doing something to change the VC raising percentage? Definitely. It's something that I've been working on through the Skandalaris Center, and a big part of it is trainings like this, where we're helping the presenters be able to identify the unconscious bias that may be at work, but also when we're working with the judges and investors who participate in our entrepreneurial competitions, they receive a very similar training so that they have the same awareness that the presenters do. The burden is not entirely on the presenters. A big burden is on the judges and investors as well. And one of the points that I didn't get a chance to make when I was going through my slides is that what's really interesting is, and how we know it's very deeply unconscious bias, is that there's not actually a difference between who's asking those questions. Men and women are just as likely to answer or ask promotion and prevention based questions of men and women respectively, as so it's equal. I'm just as likely to do it as my male counterparts are. So that's why we're trying to raise awareness. And a lot of the judges and investors we work with through our competitions are local leaders. And our hope is that they take that information back to what they're doing and use that to inform, their other practices. I know Elise in her work with Cultivation Capital is out there being a warrior for, equaling the playing field. So we're working on it. It's a slow culture change, but we're going to get there. Startup Weekend, the St. Louis Startup Week is for everybody. There is a website that has looks like Elise put that link in there, so that's open to everybody. And I'm going to share a link to a document that you can view and download. And it's really some of the same language that was on the slide earlier about prevention versus promotion questions, but can serve as a good reminder. It's actually our judges cheat sheet to help them remember how to frame their questions. but I think it's just as valuable for anybody who's preparing a presentation as well. So that was question 4. All right, it looks like we have one more question, and then we're gonna have to wrap it up.
Yep. So last question is, besides a Google search, is there are there any good places or ways to find angel or VC investor groups?
Yeah, so I put a link in the chat to the EQ, which is Entrepreneur Quarterly. They have something called the St. Louis Startup Ecosystem Map. And there are a list of about 8 different early stage startup accelerator programs. Those are typically funding organizations. And it's a little easier to find them, right? Because they hold competitions, you can apply. It's a bit more of a democratic process in a way, rather than, you know, individual investors. Finding an angel investor is tough, right? Because that's all about, do you know someone in your network who is of, you know, a certain net worth, who would be able to have the risk capital to invest in a very risky startup, right? A couple of groups to look into. So the St. Louis Archangels is a group, like I mentioned, of angel investors. You can see the startup accelerators on the list. Arch Grants is a fantastic, technically they're called a venture philanthropy program. They give out 20 $50,000 grants every year. It is industry agnostic, and it's a grant. So they're not taking, you know, it's not an investment. They're not taking equity in your company. They're just giving you free money. And the strings are that you have to headquarter or have an office in St. Louis for 1 year. So those are a couple of options. Just to list off a few VC firms to look at if you are more towards the Series A stage. Cultivation Capital, my firm I mentioned, we focus on software, so agriculture tech, as well as healthcare. Lewis and Clark Ventures is another Series A to Series B stage fund that focuses on those same kind of industry verticals. If you're in the healthcare side, Biogenerator, which is the investment arm of BioSTL, does a lot of early stage investments in healthcare, biotech, and ag. Another firm, which is probably the most established VC firm in St. Louis, is Riverbest. They've had very successful funds, and they are, you know, a healthcare investor. There are also some corporate venture capital arms as well. So if you're looking at a company perhaps that could be a customer for you, they may also have a venture arm. So like RGA, Reinsurance Group of America, has RGAX that invests. Ascension Ventures, which is the largest nonprofit hospital system, I believe, in the country, they have, you know, even as a hospital, a venture arm that invests. You know, Boeing has Horizon X, which invests as well. So definitely check out those corporate VC opportunities, because a lot of times if they're working with you as a customer, you know, they may also be interested in investing in your business.
Awesome. Thank you, Elise. I tried to type those as you were saying them, so they should be in the chat. It's easy to copy and paste out of the chat or download the chat. Again, thank you so much for joining our Skandalaris Center Startup webinar series. If you've got questions, let us know. Otherwise, have a great rest of the day, and thanks for being here.
Thanks, everybody.